Welcome to our fourth summer special series of Whole Lot of Wolves. I'm Paul LePage and I'm here with Danny Paletti.
Good evening.
We are thrilled to welcome our guest as well, acclaimed author Jake Perry, on the eve of the release of his book Nights in Gold Satin, when Wolverhampton Wanderers ruled the world. Jake's passion for football history shines through with captivating storytelling, bringing to life the golden era for Wolves and its unforgettable triumphs. Deep insights, evocative narratives. It's a book that tells us about the glory days when Wolverhampton Wanderers was truly the giant of the world game. Jake, welcome to A Whole Lot of Wolves.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
We always kick off by asking our guests, firstly, how did you become a Wolves fan?
I guess like a lot of people, through family, through my dad, my Uncle Keith taking me to games. Back in the kind of mid-70s was my first time going to Molineux. I really wish I could remember what my first game was, look back on it, but I can just remember kind of images of that time, pictures, of queuing up and going through the turnstiles. And I guess that picture that we all have, when you come up the steps and you see the ground out in front of you for the first time, and that little hit of excitement you get, that I still get every time I go up to Molineux as well. So it's kind of those pictures I have in my head. But I kind of grew up surrounded by the club as well, in that my parents still live in our house in Compton, which is on a little kind of estate of cul-de-sacs, and Wolves used to house a lot of the players nearby. So we had Jim McCalliog, who lived kind of in the road just across from us, and down just below us there was Frank Monroe and Dave Wagstaff lived. So I remember playing, when I was a kid with Grant and Stuart Monroe and Scott Wagstaff, and then in later years I remember Ian Ross moved over the road from us. He came as player coach in John Barnwell's time, and I remember a party at Ian's on a Sunday afternoon, going to that and meeting Raphael Villazan, who just signed for Wolves at that time. And I remember him being just a lovely guy and making time to speak to me. And he smoked these little cigars. I remember these little thin cigars. It just looked the coolest thing in the world. So yeah, I kind of grew up surrounded by the club, and then it's been quite different in more recent years, because in 1987 I came up to Scotland to study, and I stayed. I got a job, and then my wife arrived, and then the family arrived, and before I know it, kind of the best part of 40 years have gone by. But the club is still a hugely important part of my life, and I get to games whenever I can.
So if you had one memorable game over that time period, which one would it be?
It's a really good question, actually. It would probably be the first game that I can remember some details of, which was in 1979. It's about April 79, and I was 10 at that time, and we played Derby County. And I still remember, the excitement during the day when I was at school, because I was going to the game that night, and my Uncle Keith picking me up and taking me, and we won 4-0. Stood on the South Bank, and I remember Billy Rafferty scored, and then George Berry scored the goal that I still judge every other goal against that I see live. I remember he picked up the ball in front of the North Bank and ran the length of the field and scored from the edge of the box. It was just a fantastic goal. And Steve Daly scored. I think it was his last goal for Wolves before he moved to Man City. And then Peter Daniel late penalty wrapped it up. But I'd love to be there again, and just the excitement of the fact it was an evening game as well. I think I've always been fascinated by floodlit games, and I think that probably had a large part in it. Big win, exciting day. What more could you ask for? So
some of the names that you're reeling off, probably this question is going to be pretty tricky next, but who's your all-time favorite Wolves player? And then the second part is, out of the current squad, who's your favorite player?
Yeah, that is a really hard question. I guess, I mean, there's something about all the players of the time that you like, you know. But when I was growing up, I used to really like Derek Parkin. You know, he's so kind of consistent and reliable, and you know, he has the appearance record for good reason, really. And Kenny Hibbett, of course, John Richards. What a player John Richards was. You know, great finisher, and reinvented himself as a number 10. You know, in later years when Andy Gray kind of came along. But I suppose if I had to choose one player, and it probably wouldn't be too much of a surprise, it would be Steve Bull. For as much as what he represented off the field as what he did on it, you know, it was, you know, I still remember going down Dudley Street and seeing the people, you know, with the Save the Wolves buckets, and you know, that time in the 80s that we so nearly went out of business, and Steve Bull was the sort of the figurehead of our revival from that, and he brought the buzz back to the town, and not just himself, of course, the whole team. You know, with some great players in that team, the likes of Andy Much and Robbie Dennison and so on too. But yeah, for what kind of Bully meant to the town at that time, I guess I would have to plump for him as my all-time favourite, just because of all he represented, really. And then, I mean, there's lots to like about the current team too. Really like Andre, and Agbadu as well. But again, if I had to plump for one, it would be João Gomez. I think his attitude is just brilliant. I mean, as the song goes, he's everywhere. I mean, the first time I saw him live, I remember it was his first season, and I don't get to go to, you know, as I say, as many games I'd like to, but I went down to the Forest game when we won 1-0, Ruben Neves penalty. But I remember I couldn't stop watching João. You know, he was fist pumping when he made a tackle, and he was, you know, just his attitude, and you know, this is a player that would run through walls for the team, and yeah, I think he's great.
So, share with us a little about your professional background leading up to the publication of Nights in Gold Satin.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's my first Wolves book, but it's actually my third in all. I've written a couple of books beforehand about a very different subject, about cricket, which was always kind of my second game. You know, me and my friends would play football in the winter and cricket in the summer, and I'd always been a cricket fan. And when I came to Scotland, it was only about a decade ago, actually, I kind of got involved with the Scottish cricket scene, because it's a game with a really rich history in Scotland, but kind of under the radar. And when I went to find out more about it, there wasn't a whole lot out there. And so I wrote a first book, which started life as a series of articles and then became a book called The Secret Game, which was sort of stories from the past in Scottish cricket, and then followed that up with a book that I wrote with Gary Heatley about the Scotland men's team, which is the first book I wrote for Pitch. But it's quite a different sort of challenge, I guess, you know, writing about something like Scottish cricket to writing about Wolves, in that I don't need many fingers to count the amount of books that have been written about cricket in Scotland. But, you know, right from the start, I'm really conscious that that my book's going to be on a shelf next to some absolute giants of writing and history of the club. You know, people like Steve Gordos and David Instone and Pat Quirk and Clive Corbett. You know, I mean, just all these names. But the way that they, you know, encouraged me and helped me and supported me, you know, putting me in touch with people. And Steve was brilliant. He proofread the book as I read it, as I wrote it. He's just been so generous in his support for it, and it's been a great experience, and it's the first of many is the hope. I've certainly got an idea or two for some follow-ups, so I'm this one's not out yet, and I'm already thinking about the next one. I kind of need a project, and that kind of does. But so that's the background to my book writing anyway.
Whole Lot of Wolves summer specials are brought to you by Esfuerzo Wines. Showcasing 3 generations of winemaking in every bottle, they have the perfect pairings for all of your summer beach days and barbecues. Head to esfuerzowines.com now and use the promo code VITOR, that's VITOR, to get a 30% discount on your order. And don't miss their one-pack wines, which proudly display their support of Wolverhampton Wanderers. That's esfuerzowines.com, promo code VITOR.
So, Jake, how did that initial idea of the book come about?
It had been with me since childhood, I think. When we were talking earlier on about, how I started supporting Wolves, and I guess it's the same for anybody when you start supporting any football team. You kind of fall in love with the heroes of the day, but you find out about the history as well. So I grew up, knowing these incredible names, people like Stan Cullis and Billy Wright and Johnny Hancock and Jimmy Mullen and so on and so on. And you hear about the achievements, the league titles, the FA Cups and so on. But for us, we've got this story as well. And it always captured my imagination as a kid, this concept of the floodlit friendlies, before European competition was really a thing, that we invited all these famous teams to Molineux, Spartak and Moscow Dynamo and Real Madrid and Honved, of course, and beat them all. And the press were calling us the champions of the world. That's incredibly powerful, incredibly inspiring, as a kid, that was our team. It's amazing that was happening here in front, where I am now. It's just incredible. It's unique to us. And it had always kind of, as I say, really, really captured my imagination. And then like a lot of people as well, there's a sort of family connection there too. My dad, my Uncle Keith were at some of these games. They saw Di Stefano, they saw Puskás, and so I wanted to write something for them as well as a thank you for taking me all those years ago. For introducing me to this world too. So it's a hugely inspiring story in many ways. It's perhaps the most important in our history. It's the period of the club that established our worldwide reputation. Really, it's why we've got fans all over the world. It's a big part of it is these famous 50s games, and I just wanted to collect all the information into one place and put it out there.
Now, Jake, I'm curious what specific kind of research went into putting this together. I, in my time at university, had to do some research on sort of cultural studies, and so I kind of know a little bit about how it can be a little tricky when the thing that you're talking about is not something that, seasoned historians are writing down, and we're not, saving everything in libraries from this era of football.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a bit like doing a huge jigsaw puzzle, where you've got a rough idea of what the picture looks like, but you don't know how many pieces there are, and you don't know where all the pieces are and what other little pictures it's going to create as well. So there's this whole kind of aspect to it too. And I guess living in Scotland as well, I got the added complication of my two main sources of information being in Wolverhampton. One being the Express and Star, the writings of Phil Morgan, who wrote under the the pseudonym of commentator, are just an absolute treasure trove to any historian of that era, because what I was interested in doing in the book was not just tell the story of the match, do essentially a big match report. You can see those in lots of different places, but I really wanted to talk about the background to the game, to put it in its historical context, and the context of what was happening at the club, and so on. And so those pieces were hugely valuable and beneficial to me. And the other resource was the minutes of the board meetings at the time, which Pete Crump, the Wolves historian at the Wolves Museum, gave me really generous access to, and those were great. All the little extra details of the ins and outs of the negotiations, and other little kind of fascinating little tidbits that I never imagined I'd find that were uncovered there. And then, so I would I take a trip down and I gather all this information and I bring it back here, and I'd be kind of working it through and writing it, and then making a list of questions, and then go down and answer the questions and get some new ones. And so it was this kind of backwards and forwards as I was doing it over the past 2-3 years or so. And then another really great resource as well, talking about kind of first-hand resources, people writing things down. Mike Crump, who's Pete's brother, Mike had done the Champions of the World DVDs about a decade or so ago, which are about the floodlit friendly in general, and the Homburg game in particular. But he was so generous in kind of lending me really what he collected. He sent me the letters that people had sent to him, their kind of eyewitness accounts. He gave me a big sheaf of telegrams that had come from Stan Collis's personal collection as well, which I quote in the book. So it got these really valuable sources that hadn't really been explored before, and various kind of interviews that I did too. Andrew Cullis was wonderful to talk to. Andrew, Stan's son, gave me such interesting insights into the man, as much as anything. One little story Andrew told me. He said Wolves went to Moscow in 1955. They had played Spartak in 54, and Spartak had invited them to make a return visit the next year, which they duly did. And he said, and we were sitting at home one night, and my mum was making dinner, and she was saying, where's your dad? Your dad's really late. Where's your dad? And they'd put the news on the television, only to be greeted with pictures of Wolves boarding a plane to go to Moscow, and Stan hadn't told his wife. So they kind of gone through this whole performance, and there he was. And he said that kind of thing happened all the time. He was so focused on the team, so focused on his job that often, he'd just forget things like that. It just hadn't crossed his mind to say. But Andrew was great, giving me little kind of stories like that, and so on, which were wonderful. And I also spoke to some of the players I grew up watching. So I spoke to John Richards and to Kenny Hibbert and to Mel Eves about the legacy of the games. It was actually the first thing I wrote, was the last chapter, because I wanted to find out really from their perspective what it was like coming into the club, the kind of sleeping giants, if you like, that had such success, and what pressure they felt as players coming in to look to replicate that. And of course, they did in the, winning the League Cups in 74 and 80, the kind of the first silverware of the post-Cullis era. But I was really interested to get their perspective too. So all the time I've looked for kind of different angles to try to sort of tell the story in as full a way as I can, and in a slightly different way if I can too.
Did you find the process easier or more difficult when it's actually your team and everything that happened to them?
Yeah, it's, to me, that's essential. I've got to have an emotional connection, I think, with what I'm writing about. I think if I was writing a book about, say, the development of floodlit football, which it is to some extent, it would have turned out like this. I would have had to have written it from Wolves' perspective. I'd have to kind of work in the Wolves angle somewhere. I'd find it quite difficult to take a dispassionate step back, I guess, because that kind of emotional connection is really important to me as a writer. It's an interesting little kind of byproduct of doing the book as well is that it's really made me feel closer to the town again. I've lived up in Scotland for a long time, and I've always gone back and visited and so on. But researching in this way and really thinking about the club in this way and my connection with it and everything, it's kind of made me feel close to the town, properly close to the town again, which has been a really nice kind of byproduct of that, and one that I hope to, I want to do it again. And I really hope that in reading the book that kind of affection, that enthusiasm of being a fan kind of comes through in the way that I've written it. I've certainly tried to do that anyway.
Now, it's so interesting to me that, this period where the floodlit friendlies start and floodlit football really is taking off, and how that, naturally sort of coincides with football now being able to be broadcast potentially around the world. What do you think some of our newer fans, obviously, particularly from overseas, like here in America, might be surprised to know from this period in Wolves history?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Floodlighting is ubiquitous now. It's something that we don't think about. It's such a natural part of the sport now. But I guess what might be really surprising, especially to perhaps a US audience, is just how long it took for that to happen. I mean, the authorities in England were not only kind of unhappy about floodlighting, they actively tried to put obstacles in its path, so to speak. Bearing in mind that people were watching baseball in the States under floodlights in the 30s. In England, floodlighting was banned. Playing football under floodlights was banned. I mean, there've been sort of exhibition games which had never really sort of caught on. Going back to, I think 1878, I think was the first kind of experimental floodlight game that was played at Bramwell Lane in Sheffield, I think. But anyway, and Arsenal in 1930 announced that they were going to be playing a couple of floodlit exhibition games against Rangers, who were the Scottish Cup champions of the time. Arsenal were the FA Cup holders. And they were going to play a game at Wembley, and they were going to play a game at Ibrox, and they were going to bring in floodlights and so on. And the FA basically said, no. You're not doing that. That's going to undesirable, I think was their word, because they were fearful it was going to, in their words, commercialize the game. They were very fearful of this newfangled gimmick was going to take crowds away from 3:00 on a Saturday, the traditional time for going and watching football. And so floodlighting was banned. It was said that you couldn't play football under lights. But then after the war, when clubs started going on foreign tours to the States, to Europe, and they were seeing floodlights, and they were coming back and installing them anyway, for training purposes, because of course under floodlights you could train into the winter evenings, when otherwise you'd have to stop. And so the FA kind of reluctantly gave some ground and said, well, okay, then you can play friendlies under floodlights, but that's it, no competitive football. But the door had been opened at least. But it took really up until kind of later on in the decade, it was quite a sort of incremental process. That they first of all allowed you to play to rearrange cup games under floodlights if you absolutely had to avoid fixture congestion, and then the same with league games. And eventually they said, okay, well, if both teams consent, you can play football under lights. But that was about 1957, 58, something like that. So it took a while, but very, very typical, I think, of the way that the English authorities were traditionally quite reluctant to embrace change. I mean, there's the famous, World Cup situation where England didn't bother entering the World Cup until 1950, and then promptly discovered that the world was kind of leaving them behind. And then similarly, after the European Cup was founded in 55 as a result of the Wolves Honved game and the whole Champions of the World thing, Chelsea, who were invited to be the first English team to play in the European Cup, they were, shall we say, encouraged not to take up their place. Again, FA and Football League very fearful of Saturday afternoons, suffering with all these extra fixtures. So it's perhaps that's maybe most surprising, that floodlighting, we just don't think of it now, but it was a very slow process getting it accepted as part of the mainstream. And even relatively late in the kind of, after there'd been some really successful floodlit games played, there were still newspaper articles coming out saying, oh no, this is a fad, this is not going to last at all. And it's really interesting. But I mean, it's a fascinating story, a fascinating time, that era, and that it coincided with the most successful period of our history is a really happy coincidence. I think that Wolves were really at the forefront of the development of floodlit football.
Absolutely.
So, Jake, we're going to fast forward to modern times, a little less than 2 weeks away from the new season. So, what are your hopes, expectations, fears of 25-26 for the Wolves?
I'm quietly confident with things, and I know that there's been a lot of kind of chatter about signings or lack of signings, and it's obviously at this time of year we all get really twitchy. When players are going out and it doesn't seem like many players are coming in, but it seems like things are moving now. And regardless, I think we've still got a really good squad. I can't see there being three or not being three teams that are in a worse position than Wolves next season. But I'm not looking down. I'm looking up. I'm hoping that we can really push on, and really excited to see John Arias, how he fits in. The new left back, Wolf, as well. What a fantastic name. Looking forward to watching him as well. And in Andre and João Gomez, I mean, is there a better midfield than that in the Premier League? Don't know. Not if many. There's a better duo than those two. Yeah. No. So I think this will be Strand Larsen's season as well. I think he did really well last year. And for a first season, that was a really good return, and I would love to see him really kind of kick on this year. So I think we'll surprise a few people. I think last year was a bit of a blip year. I think the later part of the season showed what we were like more than the first part of the season. I'm optimistic, which is a rare thing for a Wolves fan to say, but I know. But I'm positive and looking forward to next year, a couple of weeks' time.
And finally, as we wrap up, let our audience know how they can connect with you and get their hands on a copy of the book.
Yeah, can connect with me via Twitter or X. I'm Jake Perry, 1877. And the book is out or will be out on Amazon, the kind of usual sort of platforms. And if if there's any difficulty getting hold of a copy, get in touch with me, drop me a line, and I'll see what I can do as well. Always really, really happy to chat to fellow fans, and I just really hope that people enjoy this book. It's such an important part of our history, really, and it was an absolute pleasure for me to write it.
Thanks, Jake. That's awesome. And that brings our summer series of Whole Lot of Wolves to an end, because we're going to be back fully with the new season onwards from August the 12th. So once again, thanks to Jake Perry and to everyone out there ahead of the new season. Up the mighty Wolves.